Welcome to the DNA Advantage podcast, where you can learn facts about your DNA that can help you live a healthier, longer life, doing all the activities you dream of doing. If you want to gain more control over your health and the factors that influence it, you're in the right place. Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Witherow, and this episode is featuring an interview with Helen Sanderson, who I was lucky enough to meet in a business development group this year. In this discussion, we focus on the journey that leads us to better health, and we explored the perspectives that serve us in our pursuit of improvements. Helen is known as the Clutter Therapist and is the best-selling author of the book The Secret Life of Clutter. To learn more about how to connect with Helen or access her book, you can find links in the show notes. Helen was also kind enough to offer a free gift that can help us overcome mistakes that we make when we try to declutter our lives. I hope you enjoy our discussion. Welcome. I am so glad that you could join me today because I have wanted to talk to you for quite a while since we first met.
Great. Thank you for having me. It's really a joy to be here.
Yeah. So what I want to do is just kind of introduce you to a little bit of what I do and the purpose of the call today, of course. And it's interesting because when I work with people and first meet people, there's usually something that comes up as far as either a health concern or a performance goal, something that somebody wants to achieve or change around about their health or their performance. With that in mind, what I do is focus on the genetic aspects of it to give that next level of support beyond what we would do with just general care, because I like to personalize things. But without knowing someone's DNA, I'm able to kind of give you a glimpse of what you could learn, or maybe learn a little something about the steps that you could take prior to getting to know your DNA. So just out of curiosity, have you done a DNA test at all?
Yes, I have.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And was it an ancestry test or a health test?
Both.
Great. Okay. And were you able to learn anything from that?
I think quite a lot. I've got the COMP-T gene
Yeah.
and MTHFR
Uh-huh.
variation. I mean, it's incredibly complicated, isn't it?
It is. And
Yeah.
yes, it is. So it's nice that you know beyond just MTHFR, because so many people, that's all they've been told, honestly. And that can be a very narrow view of very large landscape of genes that we would want to know. So COMT is also another one that we would want to know. And there's a cascade of genes that would be related to MTHFR that I would want to look at as well. Like even your folate receptors, FOLR, being able to understand MTR and MTRR, because those are B12 related, and those are going to be feeding into the methylation pathway as well. Like you said, it's very complicated, but at the same time, it's almost like you learn a centralized fact about something, and then you go out from there and you learn related categories, especially when you know what that person's goal is. So if you had one priority or one thing that you would want to change or improve about your health or performance, what would that be?
It's a really good question because I was thinking someone else might say, I want to sleep better, but I'm actually a great sleeper and I love sleep. I love sleep. But I don't do very well if I lose my sleep. So I need a long sleep. But for me, it would be stress. I'm extremely busy. I've got a lot of things on, a lot of clients to look after, and I'm traveling around a lot. And so I get overwhelmed with stress. And then when I get stressed, I get sort of a little bit scratchy and irritable. That's the thing that I would really like to learn how to support myself when I'm under so much stress and strain. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love what I do. I love traveling around. I love being on the move, and actually being on the move is much better for me than sitting around. but just the quantity of work. And I don't know what it is, but if you've experienced this as well, but since we had the internet, it feels like we're doing all the corporations' admin for them because nobody has any time because instead of being able to phone up someone and find out something in 2 seconds, you then have to either sit in a queue or you have to fill out a load of forms or you have to provide all of your information to them. And, anyway, I just think life's got incredibly complicated. There's an overload of admin and things to do.
Yes, I agree. And just the amount that we're expecting ourselves to do as well.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it really increased exponentially,
Yeah.
at least in my world.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah.
And the other reason for that is because we used to send a letter
Mhm.
and wait a week, whereas now we want an instant email. So our expectations have changed and
Right.
of each other and therefore our expectations of ourselves. So we're expecting ourselves to actually deliver. Whereas I think when we had snail mail, we were probably a lot more in rhythm, I think.
Right. I agree. Giving ourselves time to breathe, time to think
Mm,
about our response rather than a
mhm.
quick email or text
Yeah.
that is right out of emotion. And of course, there's the lovely detail of reviewing before you hit send, just rereading it to yourself
Mm,
to understand the voice that's coming across, maybe
mm,
the tone that's coming through. It is something of an art, I believe, that
yeah.
might be lost for some people. So,
Yeah.
when it comes to stress management, do you feel that this is something that is a newer challenge for you, or that you've always dealt with stressful situations were more overwhelming for you?
I think I've always struggled with stress, but because I'm busier now, it's more noticeable.
Right.
And also maybe menopause has
Sure.
added another layer of complexity. So I'm much busier, which I love, but that menopause and probably taking on too much.
Sure. Having just a glimpse of your DNA or the two genes that I know are significant and can significantly contribute to this, that would be what I would expect, is that you've always had issues when there was high stress. It could be overwhelming. It can cause irritation. It can cause mood issues, all of
Mm,
that,
mm,
because it is genetic. When I say something is genetic, it doesn't mean that it cannot be supported or changed. The genes themselves cannot be changed, but the expression of those genes can be changed. And we can do very specific things when we know how those genes are coming together, either in support of us or undermining us. We can do things through our diet and lifestyle and even monitoring our environment to make sure that we're giving ourselves the very best opportunity to experience stress in the best way. And of
mm,
course, there are some stressors we can't avoid, but we want to be able to offset some of that stress and plan our lives in a way that we can best suit us. I think a certain level of stress can be very healthy because it keeps us motivated, it keeps us excited. But to your point, when we get overloaded with it, we have to look at opportunities to offset it, which I'm sure you do really well because that is what you help other people do too. But it is something of an art. Again, doing it for ourselves versus others can be a little dicey. Sometimes we expect more of ourselves, and sometimes I think we can see things so clearly when we're looking at someone else and giving them opportunities. I often find that I'll be giving suggestions to someone else, and I think to myself, oh, I could be taking this suggestion to heart myself. It's a great opportunity to think through when the times are that you feel more overwhelmed, and then being able to kind of structure those moments or those experiences in our lives. And so I will ask, are there things that you've tried in the past that have been helpful or that have failed? Either way, anything that you've tried to help you mitigate that stress?
I've tried. So I was just thinking about this because I remember going to a homeopath once and I really believe in homeopathy. And she was saying, well, how is this remedy working for you? And I was like, I really don't know. It's very difficult to know. And so I've taken supplements like vitamin B and D and essential oils things. And, I've done, and it's really difficult to see whether or not there's a direct impact on the stress.
Yes.
So when you've got an environmental thing, the only thing that I really noticed that made a huge amount of difference was changing my diet.
Okay.
Because I used to have a lot of histamine issues,
Yes.
allergies and chest wheezing and stuff like that. And that was definitely from dust. But since I've changed my diet, it doesn't affect me so much. And also aches and pains. I'd have like joint pains, and I don't have joint pains anymore. I mean, I do occasionally,
Mm-hmm.
but consider so that was it's just things like when you take a supplement, it's very difficult to know whether or not it's actually making an impact.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we are in a habit of is adding a multivitamin, let's say, or adding three vitamins or three changes all at once. That makes it really challenging to identify what's working for us or against us. I've had clients come in and say that they had been recommended by a practitioner to take this grouping of supplements, and they would start them and have a negative reaction, and then they would have to stop all of them because they
And not
didn't know.
know which one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they wouldn't know what to do about it and which ones to extract. Now, if it's just a minor issue, you could certainly take one out at a time. But if it's something that is like anxiety, as an example, anxiety is something that people can experience when they're taking methylated vitamins, methylated nutrients, or even in some cases eating methyl donors. And so when you don't know which ones are methyl donors, it can be very difficult to decide what to take and what to extract from your regimen. So I think that that is worthy of just stopping everything because
Yeah.
anxiety is not something anyone wants to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, another really good example for you actually is the histamine thing. That because my husband knows I'm anti allopathic medicine, not
Mhm.
completely, it's got its place,
Sure.
but antihistamines, I just think
Right.
take them occasionally, but on a long term basis. So he did some research and he said, "Oh, look, you can take quercetin."
Mhm.
So we bought a load of it, a load of it, and I was like, "Great, I'll take that." I don't know, and I can't even say what it was about it, but I just thought, I don't know if this is right. I just don't know if this is right. And then when I had my genetics done, quercetin's not good for me.
Right. Because of COMT.
And also, then you think about, oh, green tea. Everybody says drink green tea. It's really good. And drink, and. So I'd bought all this green tea, but actually, green tea is not good for me either. So this is what I love about genetics and what you do, because actually, we're told there's great marketing campaigns and like everybody should be drinking matcha, or everybody should be having a cacao ceremony, or everybody should be drinking green tea. And actually, it may not be what your body wants. And I was really fortunate with the quercetin because I had an instinct that it was not right for me. I noticed that it wasn't really doing anything, and it just didn't feel right. And then that was confirmed by the genetics.
Right. And
Yeah.
that is so amazing when we have those insights. I'm so glad that you did because in today's world, it's rare. As we
Mm.
mentioned before, we have so many distractions and so many demands on us that we kind of ignore our own bodies and
Yeah.
our own signaling. So
Yeah.
I talk to a lot of people about their health, and so many of them are very disconnected from any signaling that they might be getting. And
Yeah.
it's a matter of reconnecting and listening and tracking and really getting a sense of what your body is telling you. Symptoms are the only way for your body to raise a flag that something's wrong and really get a sense of how to redirect and improve things. So it is a valuable input, but certainly we think of symptoms as just an annoyance and something that we really want to avoid at all
Oh,
costs.
yeah.
And
Just
that's
take,
where those antihistamines come into play, because people will layer in an antihistamine, not realizing that what it's doing is just trapping the histamine in their bodies. And what that's doing then is allowing for all of that histamine to accumulate within the cells and cause inflammation and disturbances without the external signals. So you're really not solving anything. You're just giving yourself some temporary relief of those outward signs, but the inward signs are going to get worse.
yeah, absolutely. And I know people that have been taking antihistamine for years,
Yes.
and you just think mast cell activation syndrome and all of that, how can that be helping? But yeah, it's so fascinating.
Yeah, and to your point, though, it's valuable to go then that step further when there are symptoms to better understand how to personalize the care for your body and understand what can lower the histamine level without causing an interference with a gene like COMT. Because when you downregulate a gene with even a natural substance, you wouldn't know unless you know your genetics. That's something that could have a longer term effect. Now, that could be a side effect, though. You could be taking quercetin or drinking green tea and start to experience the symptoms of mood changes and irritability and things like that. But very few people would connect it to the quercetin or the green tea. So it's then something that they own as a symptom or a personality trait. Oh, I'm
That,
just an irritable person.
yeah.
No, that's not true. And that's where I really want to give people back their power
Mm.
and let people know that when they start to understand their genetics and even understand their bodies, you're many steps ahead of people who haven't done the genetic testing and haven't really investigated this topic. I think when the first step is for most people to really start listening to their bodies and start reflecting on, when do I feel better? When do I feel worse? And then you dig into what might be the influences and pay attention to what's serving you and what isn't. It's a really valuable process to go through. Even for those who have their genetics, I do encourage some tracking of that information, because then you just feel so much more empowered because you can sense, I know either I slipped a little with my diet or I added this in just to see if I had a reaction and it wasn't bad. So now I know I can eat a little of this food and it's fine.
Mm. I have a little bit with that with dairy. When I was doing my master's, I was extremely stressed and I just couldn't tolerate dairy at all. I had stomach pains, and then I realized it was dairy. And ironically, because I think the only thing that got me through my master's was chocolate biscuits. And then I had to find some dairy-free ones. So then I went out hunting for vegan treats. And now when I look back, I just think, oh no, because a lot of the vegan treats are actually worse than, you know. So I've been on this whole journey, and I think what you were saying something earlier, and I was thinking, oh, you're talking about me being ahead or whatever. And I think fortunately for me, I've got this healthy skepticism for institutions. So
Right.
if the doctor says do that, I'm like, well, I'm less likely to follow it. Whereas I know that a lot of other people are probably much more inclined to follow doctor's advice. And I'm much more like, I recently injured my neck, and the specialist was saying operation, and I was like, no, thank you. And that's kind of partly my personality, is that I like to figure things out for myself. I like to do my own research. Not a scientist, but I found out about genes and everything that you do. So I find that really empowering, and I'm much more into how can I empower myself. And I can eat dairy again now since I've got rid of all the other things that were upsetting me. So I can actually tolerate it, although not too much. But it's an exciting journey when you empower yourself to find out a bit more about who you are and what makes you tick.
It is. And I love the fact that you value and appreciate the journey that you've been on. It resonates with me so much. I have been a researcher and health addict, honestly, like anything health related for the last 20 years. When I was expecting my daughter, that was when I just completely committed to health because I realized that for my child, I needed to be the difference between what my parents experienced, who both died young, to if I was going to be here for my children, and then what my children would experience, giving them the opportunity to have a full life where they were in control or had a lot more control over the outcomes and their health experiences was really critical for me. And I knew there was no other way than to really take your own body seriously. And of course, when she was born, they hadn't sequenced the genome, but once they had, it was a matter of time before they finally looked beyond disease and started looking at the health implications. And of course, the research I have, because of the loss of both my parents, that's what really caused me to have such a healthy skepticism. I don't know how healthy it was at times, but but
A
power,
passion.
right. It was very much a passion and powered me in a new direction where I was very willing, in fact, required myself to go a different direction and look at things differently from all sides to understand what were the contributors, what is the root cause of our issue, and really go into what is going to make the difference for us. Because ultimately, we can add quality of life, we can add longevity, we can give ourselves the experience that we truly want to achieve if we know and we identify what those goals are, and then we zoom in on what could be getting in the way of those goals. It's a big commitment, but if we don't commit to our health now, we are going to have to commit to the healthcare system later. And I much prefer dedicating
Yeah.
proactively to my health.
So when did they figure out the genome?
That
Got you.
was in 2003.
Oh, wow.
But of course, what was powering the research and all of the dollars that were going into the research were coming from pharmaceutical companies who were very much, and there were a lot of organizations, colleges, and universities that were also committing some dollars to that research. The drawback was that they were getting funding from pharmaceutical companies and were given parameters of what they were researching. I understand. I'm trying to be respectful in that they obviously needed to get what they wanted and what was going to benefit them out of the research. Where the miss is instead of just researching how a gene leads to or contributes to a disease, what I wanted to know was what is the role of the gene in our health? It took years for that information to surface because it's a matter of adding this disease related research to this disease related research and overlapping them to see
Yeah.
how everything pans out and how everything affects the other. And looking at health, the absence of health is disease. So you can make inferences, but there's very little tolerance in the world of medicine for inferences, or even looking at what a person has experienced and jump to a conclusion because we want to have all of these placebo tests done that cost millions of dollars. I love looking at genetics though and understanding how we're able to use our genes and looking at the collection of genes to understand how they really support us. What is their function? And when we look at genes, we can understand that the different SNPs on a gene are contributing to a protein or an enzyme. So we gain a lot of information and insight in that to know what protein and enzyme is that affecting. And then if that gene is not as efficient or that SNP is not as efficient, then what can we do to compensate? What are the cofactors that can support that particular gene and either upregulate or downregulate that SNP, and then give ourselves a lot more functionality in the direction that we want to go.
Mm. So you know that I trained as a psychotherapist, and in psychodynamic theory, we're often come to the question of, is it nature or is it nurture?
Mhm.
And there's the nature nurture debate, and the conclusion I come to is it's both.
Right.
And it's got to be the same for genes, hasn't it? It's like you have an imprint, but it's the nurture or it's the environment that it's put in that affects whether or not it's turned on, turned off, activated or not activated. So, we tend to want to be very kind of binary about things. It's either this or it's that. But
Right.
actually, it's this concept that our childhood did influence who we are, and maybe we did come in with some personality traits or some genetics and stuff like that. And something else that was occurring to me as I was listening to you was that we have Alzheimer's both in my family and my husband's family. So my husband's mum was always saying, "Oh my God, it's terrible. It would be so awful if that happened to me." And then we were talking about it, and then her grandchildren were saying, "Oh, they're going to find a cure for it soon. They're going to find a cure." And I just thought, the way we've been educated to think about illnesses is you're fated with this illness, and then the pharmaceuticals are going to find a cure. And I thought, no, we're not. It doesn't work like that. And so, because this had happened to his mum, then did develop it, and it was quite a rapid onset. And then I was thinking, well, is that going to then happen to my husband? Because if it is in the genes, and we're so lucky these days, not only because we've got these genetic information, but also because I'm not a scientist. I don't have an access to PubMed and all of these papers, but I do have access to YouTube, where there's lots of incredible doctors talking about stuff. And whereas 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would never have had that. So
Right.
then I did lots of research, and there are cases and studies now where they are reversing or slowing down or stopping the progression of Alzheimer's. And the more you know about, okay, just because you've got the gene, it doesn't even mean that you're going to get it. So
Right.
it's nature nurture thing. So we then did do a little test. Haven't got the main, I think there's several genes, aren't there, for Alzheimer's, but there's one main one, isn't it? APOE or something.
Yeah. APOE4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So haven't got that. But again, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get it, because there's other factors I'm sure that you would probably know about. So that was another thing that made us change our diet and change the way we were eating and being and stuff like that, because what we're lucky enough to have that his mum didn't have, that my dad didn't have, is information that can help us to make better choices for ourselves,
Yes.
which is where your work is so incredibly valuable.
And the foresight, being able to see that your family members before you experienced those. And it's really unfortunate. My mom died when she was 29 of cancer.
Wow.
And she didn't have any warning that cancer was in her family. Now,
Mm.
eventually, after she passed, her mom, her dad, and her sister all experienced cancer at one point in their lives. That is most certainly enough to warn me that I need to do something differently.
Mm.
And then,
Mm.
of course, my dad had cancer as well. So it's a done deal for me. I need to do something different. But I look at it as an opportunity to make that difference and make changes in my life, even though it's not easy. It's not something that a lot of people welcome because they want to just live their lives and just kind of go through the paces that like everyone else is doing. But I don't. Like I see the opportunity, and I think that even the quality of life that I'm having now I can see is different not being on any medications. When we look at, I don't know what it's like there, but in the US, people they have age statistics, how many medications that people are typically on, all the way down to like 14-year-olds. It's
Mm.
crazy to think that there is a high percentage of 14-year-olds that are on medications. And so, again, to your point, it is expected then in our culture to just accept that and continue on that medication for the rest of our lives.
because we've been fed that narrative that
Right.
if it's genetic, it's fated. Even my brother-in-law said, well, I'd rather not know if I've got the gene because I just rather not know. And I'm like, but if you do know, you can do something about it. But
Right.
of course, that I'm this the healthy skeptic in the sense that I don't listen to all of that stuff. But
Right.
it's incredibly powerful the way we've been programmed to think that you need to be on this. I mean, the whole statins argument about how many people are on statins. I'm in my late 50s and I'm not on any medication.
Right. And that's amazing.
Rare, I
It is
imagine.
rare. It's very rare in the US too. I am right there with you, and I'm not on any medications, and I do not plan to be on any medications. Now, I understand there are situations
Yeah.
where medications cannot be avoided, and I completely appreciate that. But what I would challenge a person to do is, if given a prescription, I would encourage them to look at what can be done naturally and what are the
Mm.
potential root causes of that condition. So let's just say it's diabetes. I want to fully understand what are the potential contributors and root causes so that I can dive deep into my own lifestyle, my own family history, all of the details, and hopefully genetics to better understand what the root cause is for me and then be able to address it. I could still be on the medication while I'm doing all of this. So I'm getting that temporary relief, but I'm looking deeper and understanding what can I do naturally that can actually address and change that undertow that's pulling me down, because that medication is not solving the problem.
Mm. It's just a walking stick.
Right. It is. And it's not giving your body, even if it's type 1 diabetes, I understand that there's a medication that is required, insulin, but you're not training the body to make the insulin
No.
that it should be making.
And I
So we
feel the
have to
same.
look at, yeah, ways that we can help to level things out and give the body what it needs. And to your point about epigenetics, the environment, the lifestyle, and the diet would be the epigenetic implications on our health. And when you're asserting those powers over your health and you have weaknesses in your genetics, you have to make sure those match up. What are the decisions you're making? Do they match up with your genetics that are taking you in the right direction for your goals? And what's interesting is I don't, have you ever heard of the study? You probably have in your line of work, but the study with the cherry blossoms and the mice. But the study was all about epigenetics. And they were looking to see if a mother mouse was influenced by the researchers, and you would put the scent of cherry blossoms over the cage. And at the same time that that would waft down and give them the scent, there would be a little shock on a plate at the bottom of the cage. And they would scurry away from that
Mm.
area into a protected area where that plate wasn't under their feet. And they would do this for a period of time. And what they found was the little baby mice, when they were born, had the reaction even without any stimulus. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, that's how we evolve,
right,
isn't it?
we learn what is dangerous. And they found that that is as many as 5 generations down the line. Now, again, that's with mice. So we don't know that that transfers across to humans exactly, but we do know that we have exhibited the
Mm.
signs of evolution, and there are benefits and drawbacks to genetic variants. Sometimes they'll call it mutations. It's not a mutation unless it's in less than 1% of the population. So with like MTHFR, it's not a mutation, it's actually a variant. And
Mm.
that variant has been through evolution that we have more than 40% in the US have a variant on MTHFR.
Mm.
And so you have to think about what are the benefits of that variant versus the detriments, because there are some. And
Yeah.
so we have to then appreciate what our goal is. And of course, folate is very valuable for our health. It's very important for methylation. We do need to make sure that we can facilitate either methylfolate or folinic acid and make sure that we're getting what we need. But to your point, if when you were eating more of the biscuits and the vegan and maybe even some of the carbs that you would be eating to kind of fill in when you were in graduate school, which I did
Yeah.
too. Graduate school was very stressful,
Yeah.
but
It was the worst thing I could have done,
it's
ironically.
right. And what's interesting is depending on the person, it could be even worse because for me, I found out when I did my genetics that I needed to be gluten free.
Mm.
And I didn't know that.
Okay.
And so it really is something that it could be our undoing when we're trying to find comfort food. And I was in that position where I was numb to what was really good for me and what my body was really telling me because I was so busy and just kind of going through the motions. So
Yeah.
we all can go through that, and the opportunity to really take a step back, observe our own bodies, start tracking things, listen to our bodies, and then eventually learn about our genetics can be life changing for sure. And certainly give us a real sense of peace about what our decisions are and know that we're going in the direction that we want to be going. And I believe very much that when we are diagnosed with something, and I'm sure that you've had this same realization over time, when we're diagnosed with something and we're labeled with a diagnosis, when you look at the whole foundation of the system, those diagnoses are created in order to code for insurance and in order to qualify for a medication. And it's
Mm.
like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So is this
It's
something I
nuts, isn't
actually
it?
have, or is it a label that's put on my symptoms that could be caused by something entirely different, like anxiety? I might be labeled with an anxiety disorder. And yet, when I look at my genes, or when I think about it, let's say I'm not even looking at genetics yet. When I think about it and I know genetics, I know it could be because of at least four different genetic systems and pathways. So, how could it all be lumped together? And how could the same medication help everyone in that category? There's no way. And that's why some medications help for a moment, but then they kind of fail. Or,
Isn't it true though of antidepressants as well? Because there are lots of different types. You know, there's the SSRIs, there's the MAOs,
yes,
and the and the
antidepressant.
SME or SAMEs or something. I don't know. Anyway, there's lots of different, you know, whether it's dopamine or the different
Right,
neurotransmitters. So you don't know if you're depressed, which one is being affected, perhaps.
right,
And then, you know, here's the citalopram or the Prozac or whatever. And actually, who's really doing the research to find out if that's the right fit for you? Yeah,
right.
I really feel strongly about that too. Yeah.
Yeah, it is definitely a problem because when we're labeled, it's also what we're given is the expectation that that is what we need to be dealing with for the rest of our lives. That is a part of who we are. And
Mm.
what I find interesting is postpartum depression is a perfect example because postpartum as its own, it's a timing, right? It's something that our body has gone through, and then it has changed things in some way, and it's temporary because we do go back to, I don't want to say the way we were because I don't know that that never happened after having a child, but it does go back closer to where we were. And yet we're told that we have to be on medication forever. And it's like, wait a minute, wait, why? And that doesn't make any sense to me. And that was one of the big things too that I really challenged because I'm like, I'm just like you. I challenge everything, and not in a bad way. I think that I think we're constructive in the way that we challenge things because it's a matter of really truly understanding why. It's not to be difficult, it's to be thorough.
I'm curious about if you genetically, if you can see neurodiversity, because actually, in answer to your question, so I'm dyslexic, and I think that when I was late diagnosed, so when I had my test, I was probably in my 40s, and she said, "Oh, you're a well-adapted dyslexic." And I thought, I wonder if a lot of my strategy in life is I have to understand something before I can take it on board, and that is partly something to do with being a well-adapted dyslexic. It's like I can't just write a load of stuff. I have to understand it, and then it takes me longer and everything. But so that's kind of where I'm coming from. It's like I have to understand something. Don't just tell me I need an operation on my neck. I have to understand what that means and what, what the consequences are, and, whether or not I can heal myself. And I ended up doing lots of research about that and doing a 5-day fast and learning about stem cells. And, so that's kind of, and I do wonder if that's partly because when you're dyslexic, you have to find ways of working around things that you don't understand, or that but can you find neurodiversity in genes? Do you see that, or is that?
Well, so that's a really deep, complex question. But
Okay.
to touch on it, it's even COMT could be involved,
Yeah.
because when we look at COMT and we understand, it is very much involved in our level of dopamine. So our learning process, our ability to think quickly and for everything to kind of come together quickly. That's not the only gene, but we also can look at what our external factors are and how they affect other genes. So as an example, heavy metals. One of the big topics all over the world is how heavy metals can impact and have impacted the increase of neurodiversity in the
Yeah.
population. And when you
Toxicity of the body and everything. Yeah.
right. And when you start to look at that, you have to appreciate how well the body is detoxifying, how well the system is adapting to the environment, and how capable it is of taking in nutrients, certain specific nutrients also. Because if all of those systems collide because of inefficiencies, and those epigenetic factors are imposed on us, the environmental and the diet, that's where people will say, well, I was diagnosed with this particular disorder or concern, and as soon as we changed these things, it improved. Or they'll say, this child was diagnosed as autistic, and then these things we completely changed, and now they're no longer autistic. Well, here's the thing, that goes back to the labeling, because when we're labeling people, we're not in the traditional medical model, we're not looking at why, even though there could be 5 different reasons why. They're just lumping it all together. When you start to take that label away and you look at the details and you determine which of these areas are actually inefficient in the body, and then you compensate the body. Let's say that there are detoxification issues and they're having challenges getting rid of the excess aluminum in their systems, which maybe they got through a vaccine. I hate to say the word, but
or drinking canned drinks, maybe.
yeah, it could come from multiple directions. And there's a tipping point for everyone that is different. But when people say, well, why wouldn't everyone be autistic if the vaccines are causing it? Because everyone is different. We all have different tolerance levels. And some people are very efficient at getting the aluminum out. And for those who aren't efficient at it, it can hit the brain faster for them if their blood-brain barrier is more susceptible. And that's other genes that we have to look at. So it's really important to appreciate the complexity. You don't have to understand all the complexities, but to just appreciate that's one example of an autistic diagnosis that could be attributed to aluminum that is never even investigated in the traditional medical model. And we want to be able to better understand, what can I do about it? What can I do it for future children? Like, how do I decide whether I'm going to have another child? If I'm still of childbearing age and I want to have more children, but the doctors say, well, it's up to chance. It's not. We have to look at what the genes are. We can look at the parental genes. It's not a foregone conclusion. That's why I didn't become a genetic counselor, because my feeling was I don't want to just stop at that and help coach people on whether they should have children or what their risk factors are. If I'm looking at someone and I say, I see the BRCA gene for breast cancer, I'm not going to tell someone that they have a 40% greater chance of breast cancer and walk away. That is not my game. I'm not doing it. I will go in and say, it looks like you have the BRCA gene. You also have very efficient detoxification of estrogen. I want to look at all the estrogen detoxification genes. The xenoestrogen is going to be a factor. So I want to look at what their exposure is to xenoestrogens. What is their status for estrogen? Let's do a hormone test. Let's look at how your body is actually managing things on a day-to-day basis. And then we want to look at how well your body is methylating. So we want to look at your methylation genes. We want to look at your nutrition genes, how well you actually absorb your nutrition. We're a complex being with many different organs and many different systems, and looking at the genetics associated is so incredibly valuable.
Yeah, amazing. It's amazing what you do.
Well, it's just amazing how we're built, isn't it? Like it's incredible. And to your point, yes, we have a lot of opportunity and a lot of things that pull us away, and the internet can be our friend and it can be our foe it could be our undoing. But to have this opportunity to better understand our bodies and to go a new direction instead of just waiting until we get sick to then cover up the symptoms until we die is not my way of thinking. Like, I will not go that direction.
Me neither.
And
We'll
I
be the
know,
only ones.
yeah, and I knew when we met that that was why we aligned so well, because even though we didn't talk about this, I could tell that we were definitely aligned. I so appreciate this conversation because it was very exciting. And, I think when you talk through your stress management, I think you're well on your way, I'm sure, to handling it. But I think really looking closer at a broader scope of your methylation genes, making sure that your nutrition genes are very aligned with what you're eating. And you could be making maybe some subtle tweaks that could give you even more of the structure that your body needs going forward. But yeah, we can certainly talk about that later. But
Great.
yeah, it's super exciting, and I'm so glad that you've made the changes and taken the steps that you have, because you're just taking control of your health, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Great. It was fantastic talking to you. Thank you
Yeah,
for
thank you so much.
inviting me on.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I hope that we get to speak again soon.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining me to learn about DNA health. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. If you'd like to join my free community where we delve into more details about DNA, just click Community below.